All right, there's a quiet rumor circulating within the darker corners of the Imperium, whispering of a clandestine project that might overshadow even the legendary Space Marines. People are saying a new breed of super soldiers is on the horizon, and whether that's cause for excitement or dread remains to be seen. I've been trawling through all sorts of fan discussions and obscure lore snippets, and it's astonishing how these rumors seem to pop up in the unlikeliest of places. Some hobbyists claim they heard talk of a secret facility hidden away on a remote fortress world where the Imperium's most brilliant, and possibly unorthodox, geneticists have been quietly toiling under heavy guard. Others bring up tales of mysterious shipments, loaded with strange bio-augmented materials, moving through supply lines that allegedly don't appear on any official record. The sheer volume of gossip out there is staggering, and everyone seems to have their own spin on what this project might look like once it surfaces. What really sets people's imaginations ablaze is the idea that these potential super soldiers could surpass anything the Imperium has produced before. I've seen a few fans suggest these rumors indicate a major leap forward in battlefield capabilities, possibly making these soldiers more adaptable to different war zones. There's been chatter about them withstanding greater psychic threats or even performing feats that would leave veteran Astartes wide-eyed. One theory I stumbled on goes so far as to claim these so-called prototypes might be purpose-built to counter a specific Xenos threat, though nobody agrees on which Xenos that might be. It could be the unstoppable tides of Tyranids, or maybe the ever-resurrecting threat of the Necrons, but it's all speculation. Still, the prospect alone is enough to keep people speculating late into the night. Fans often get a little carried away, of course, reading between lines in every scrap of lore or snippet of text. I've noticed a bunch of decoders on message boards combing through official codexes, campaign supplements, and even tie-in novels for hints that the Imperium is funneling resources into some covert enterprise. They'll point out a subtle line in a short story, referencing a cryptic laboratory under watch by the Inquisition, or a passing mention of experiments in gene seed manipulation. Then, they'll tie that to a rumor from an entirely different source about newly developed weaponry or unusual alliances formed between certain Imperial factions. Piece by piece, they attempt to assemble a puzzle that might prove the Imperium's grandiose plans. It's absolutely enthralling to see how devoted some folks can get when they believe they've caught on to a secret breadcrumb trail. There's also a lot of disagreement among fans on whether this is even a good idea. The Imperium, let's be honest, is not known for its caution or gentle hand when it comes to research, especially in anything related to genetics or advanced military tech. The notion of perfecting a warrior beyond the already formidable Adeptus Astartes sends chills down some fans' spines. A few see the possibility of a brand new arms race, or they worry that meddling too far with genetics might invite some unwanted attention from certain warp-based horrors. After all, the Imperium's history is littered with cautionary tales of ambition gone awry. Plenty of folks on the forums recall various hidden projects that either vanished under suspicious circumstances or produced monstrous results. It's enough to keep conspiracy theories churning indefinitely. At the same time, many are thrilled by the notion that the Imperium might be taking a bold step forward. In a galaxy as brutal as this, fresh innovation is often overshadowed by dogma and fear. Could a new generation of super soldiers shift the Imperium's centuries-old stalemate with its myriad enemies? Enthusiasts can't help but dream about an entire legion of unstoppable warriors, engineered to adapt faster, strike harder, and operate more autonomously than anything we've seen so far. There's a sense of electric excitement in the air, at least among those who believe these rumors have a kernel of truth. People are imagining entire crusades where these advanced troops lead the charge, capturing territory that once seemed impossible to hold. However, nothing is certain. Part of what makes this rumor so captivating is the cloak of secrecy draped around it. In some circles, any talk of clandestine super soldiers draws immediate accusations of tinfoil hat conspiracy. There are always skeptics who roll their eyes at the idea, reminding everyone that the Imperium struggles to maintain even its known armies and fleets. So how could it possibly hide a massive research endeavor? Others wonder if such speculation is intentionally stoked by the Imperium's propaganda machine to distract from real crises. And then there are those who think the entire story might be an attempt by rival factions, perhaps even Chaos infiltrators, to sow panic and distrust within Imperial ranks. Still, for every skeptic, there's someone else who fervently believes that these hints point to something monumental. I've listened to folks propose that these future super soldiers would be shaped not only by advanced gene seed processes, but also by next-level bionics, offering them near-perfect synergy between flesh and technology. A few fans even go so far as to proclaim that this might be the dawn of a new Imperial Golden Age, especially if these warriors can be mass-produced without the same time-intensive rites the Astartes require. It might sound like a far-fetched dream, but Warhammer 40K is rife with improbable leaps and dark secrets. Who's to say the Imperium hasn't found a novel approach to surpassing its own limitations? In truth, that question, whether a new breed of super soldiers is emerging, looms large over every bit of speculation. Some fans seem convinced that tomorrow's battles will be fought by these mysterious giants, while others expect the rumors to dissolve into yet another half-forgotten legend. For my part, I'm more curious than convinced. The Imperium's capacity for secrecy is unparalleled, and its willingness to experiment in the name of survival knows no bounds. If there's even a shred of truth in these rumors, we might be on the cusp of witnessing a major shift in how humanity wages war across the stars. The full picture remains elusive, but that hasn't stopped anyone from placing bets on when, or even if, these elusive super soldiers will march into the light. Right now, all we have are murmurs and tidbits, but the galaxy thrives on half-truths and hidden agendas. One day, maybe we'll see official confirmation that the Imperium has cracked the code to constructing something more potent than any warrior who's come before. Or maybe we'll discover it's just another rumor swirling in the endless void, spun by those who yearn for a glimmer of hope in a relentless, unforgiving universe. Either way, these whispers have ignited imaginations everywhere, and I can't help but feel a strange mix of anticipation and apprehension every time the topic surfaces. If the Imperium truly is crafting a new generation of super soldiers, the future battlefields of the 41st millennium might be about to get a lot more interesting. When people talk about the Imperium's desire to forge ever more formidable warriors, I can't help but think back to how it all began. Long before the Imperium became synonymous with towering power armor and gene-wrought soldiers, there were desperate efforts to pull humanity out of an age of darkness. It's almost mind-boggling that, in the dim past, creating superhuman fighters wasn't just a lofty vision. It was a matter of pure survival. Even the earliest prototypes, known as the Thunder Warriors, were a testament to the Emperor's ruthless drive. By most accounts, these warriors were incredibly strong, easily able to shatter armies of baseline humans, but they also had a reputation for being terrifyingly unstable. Some fans describe them as glorious yet tragic figures, doomed to burn bright and burn out fast. Their downfall still makes me shudder, especially when you consider the whispers that they were disposed of once their usefulness had passed. After that violent chapter, the Emperor turned his gaze to something more refined. Those who've pored over old lore might know this period as the time of the Primarch Project, a secretive effort that produced not just mighty individuals, but legends. The Primarchs were essentially demigods walking among mortals, each a monumental achievement of genetic engineering. Their significance in shaping the Imperium can't be overstated. That endeavor directly led to the creation of the Adeptus Astartes, whose gene seed was derived from their respective Primarch. From my perspective, it's the foundational story of how the Imperium came to rely on elite, gene-enhanced forces to defend the species. Imagine being an onlooker in those times, witnessing the Emperor's grand vision unfold. It must have felt like a new dawn, with these giants riding forth to reclaim humanity's lost domains. The success of the Astartes was extraordinary. Suddenly, the Imperium boasted entire legions of genetically refined soldiers, each molded to represent the best traits of their Primarch. This wasn't just a small step up from standard infantry, it was a transformation of the entire military doctrine. Space Marines were capable of surviving conditions that would pulverize ordinary humans, from toxic alien atmospheres to warp-infested battlegrounds. Their intellect and discipline were similarly enhanced, turning them into peerless warriors of mind and body. Fans often wax poetic about this era. Some say it was humanity's golden moment, just before the galaxy's inevitable descent into total war. But behind that brilliance, I sense an undercurrent of apprehension. Once you prove it's possible to sculpt human DNA to these extremes, where do you draw the line? From that point on, the Imperium's approach to engineering its champions only grew more complex. While the core methods for producing Astartes remained closely guarded, there were always murmurs of side projects and specialized endeavors lurking on the fringes. Some folks enjoy theorizing about what hidden labs might have cooked up advanced offshoots of standard gene seed. Others point out how certain chapters exhibit peculiar mutations or unique doctrines, possibly hinting at ongoing experimental lines. You see it in a few of the more mysterious chapters, whose heritage is cloaked in secrecy, or in those rumored to have additional augmentations beyond the typical implants. More mainstream fans might argue that these anomalies reflect the Imperium's decentralized structure. Chapters evolve in their own ways, after all, but there are always those who suspect something deeper. When you read older Codex lore, you might stumble across references to cursed foundings, periods when the High Lord sanctioned new Astartes chapters with gene seed that was, well, let's just say not entirely stable. A few of those foundings produced some terrifying results: unforeseen psychic phenomena, physical aberrations, or even entire chapters dissolving into madness. In the fan community, these stories spark endless debates. Was it mere accident or deliberate testing of new gene seed variants? People bring up these cautionary tales whenever talk turns to the Imperium's zeal for breeding better soldiers. They see it as a repeated pattern. Every time the Imperium tries to push the limits, unforeseen consequences rear their head. Yet for every fiasco, you have a chapter like the Grey Knights, a shining testament to what careful engineering can achieve under tight control. Their entire existence is steeped in secrecy, and they're often cited as the pinnacle of anti-chaos warfare. A lot of fans interpret this success as a sign that the Imperium has, at least in some corners, mastered the art of precision genecraft. The Grey Knights might not be a conventional chapter at all, given their specialized recruitment and psychic might, but they stand as proof that advanced experimentation can yield astonishing results if done correctly. It's a double-edged sword, of course. Knowing that there's a proven record of success just encourages the Imperium to keep pushing boundaries. Over the centuries, we've seen examples of specialized offshoots beyond the Astartes themselves. Certain branches of the Officio Assassinorum, for instance, employ arcane augmentations that practically redefine what a human body can do. The Eversor Temple stands out most dramatically. Its assassins undergo chemical and cybernetic enhancements that allow them to fight at a level far exceeding baseline humanity. Some fans consider them living nightmares rather than heroic protectors, but the results are undeniable. Each Eversor is essentially a one-person devastation engine, unstoppable until their mission is complete, or they self-destruct in a blaze of hyperstimulated fury. I find it all disturbingly fascinating. A perfect display of how the Imperium is willing to push its own moral boundaries if it sees a tactical advantage. Even with that historical context, the Imperium remains incredibly tight-lipped about anything that smacks of ongoing research. It's the pattern you notice when you gather enough stories. Yes, the Imperium invests heavily in super soldier programs, but they always wrap it in layers of secrecy. Fan circles love to speculate on all the hush-hush labs out there, from Mechanicus-run gene forges to rumored inquisitorial black sites. Many see it as a natural evolution of the Emperor's original blueprint, continually refined across millennia of warfare. And well, if there's one thing the Imperium excels at, it's turning adversity into impetus for radical innovation, no matter how heretical or dangerous it might appear from the outside. To me, this entire history is equal parts inspiring and unsettling. On the one hand, the Imperium only stands today because of its unwavering commitment to forging some of the galaxy's most fearsome warriors. On the other, each success story often comes with a shadow side of horror and ethical compromises. Whenever I read about how these past endeavors shaped current dogma, I can't help but wonder if the Imperium has ever really learned from its own missteps, or if it's simply grown better at disguising them. One thing is certain: you can't dive into Warhammer 40K without being awed by the legacy of gene-enhanced champions who've bled for humanity. And for me, that legacy remains one of the most captivating threads running through the entire universe. I've been skulking around various discussion boards and combing through any new lore snippets for months, and it's wild how many unconnected sources seem to converge on one central theme. The Imperium is onto something. You'll see a supposed leak from a frontline guardsman who swears he glimpsed a figure that stood taller than a space marine, marching silently through a restricted hangar. You'll find an almost throwaway remark in an obscure campaign supplement hinting at an unlisted research facility that receives shipments of gene seed classified above top secret. Piecemeal, these stray hints are sparking a frenzy of speculation, and folks are all asking the same question. Is the Imperium truly perfecting a new generation of Supersoldiers? What fascinates me is how these rumors have taken on a life of their own. In the past, stray comments or suspicious sightings might get brushed aside as nonsense. But now, there's an undercurrent of desperation in the Imperium's countless battlefronts, and that sense of urgency might be fueling belief in a last-ditch secret project. I've even noticed that some people are scouring artwork from official sources, looking for hidden clues. They'll point to a lineup of silhouettes in a background scene. One shape appears slightly bulkier or stands at an unusual angle, and suddenly the theory builds. That's it. That's the new super soldier. It might sound far-fetched, but fans have a knack for drawing surprising connections that sometimes turn out to be on the mark. There's also a curious uptick in stories about entire regiments being reassigned overnight, supposedly to protect hidden research stations. One rumor that keeps cropping up describes an incident on a remote fortress world where entire swaths of the population were relocated, with official reports citing an environmental hazard. Local garrison troops later joked that the only hazard was stepping out of line near the facility's labyrinth of labs. Nobody can confirm the source of these stories, of course, but that hasn't stopped them from spreading like wildfire. I'm always torn between skepticism and excitement whenever I read these accounts. It's the perfect storm of typical Warhammer grimdark secrecy, yet part of me wants to believe something momentous really is happening behind locked gates. Among the fan community, opinions are polarized. Some insist this is just a rehashed rumor, nothing more than the usual speculation that crops up whenever there's a content drought. They argue that the Imperium has more pressing concerns than another high-stakes gene project and point to the extensive resources already channeled into existing forces. On the other side, you've got the crowd that's absolutely convinced the Imperium has embarked on something that could overshadow past accomplishments. They'll cite the mounting crises, rampaging Xenos on multiple fronts, warp storms erupting unpredictably, and heresy flaring up in places once deemed secure. In their view, it's almost inevitable the Imperium would greenlight a hidden initiative to develop warriors capable of clawing back some semblance of stability. A recurring topic in these discussions is how the Imperium might circumvent the pitfalls that plagued earlier experiments. People ask whether these rumored super soldiers could be designed with advanced mental conditioning to ensure unshakable loyalty. They wonder if the Adeptus Mechanicus has contributed radical biomechanical implants that fuse flesh and steel seamlessly, all in an effort to create a soldier who's not just physically unmatched, but almost incorruptible. Fans love to speculate on the moral implications of such an approach. Some see it as the logical next step in humanity's fight for survival, while others worry it's a path to uniform, emotionless drones that might lose the very spark that makes them human. It's also noteworthy how certain fringe sources claim to have direct contact with individuals in the know. A few discussion threads popped up, where anonymous posters insisted they'd witnessed closed-door trials or seen hush-hush memos detailing the progress of a new strain of gene seed. Most of these threads either vanish quickly or get buried under skepticism, but the hints keep resurfacing. One such poster claimed that these prototypes were being tested in real combat environments under the guise of highly classified kill teams, purpose-built to eradicate especially dangerous Xenos threats. According to that story, the field reports showed remarkable endurance and strategic adaptability, traits that might exceed even the formidable capabilities of standard Astartes. Is it genuine insider info or creative fan fiction? No one can say for sure, but the sheer consistency of the details is enough to make people sit up and take notice. Interestingly, as momentum builds, the lack of any official denial from known Imperial authorities only adds fuel to the fire. Usually, if a wild rumor gains too much traction, you might see an official statement designed to squelch it. But silence often speaks volumes. Some fans believe this is a deliberate tactic. The Imperium might be letting rumors swirl to camouflage real initiatives or sow confusion among its enemies. The possibility that certain intelligence services are stoking the discussion on purpose is enough to keep me hitting refresh on every forum I can find. It's a hallmark of the Warhammer universe that deception, rumor, and half-truths are as potent as any bolt or shell. Meanwhile, there's a more philosophical angle that has folks intrigued. If the Imperium is indeed forging a new class of soldiers, how will they fit into the established hierarchy? Could this be a preliminary step toward revitalizing humanity's role in the galaxy? Or is it a desperate measure that might backfire spectacularly? Conversations tend to circle around that tension between hope and dread. On some days, I see fans celebrating the idea that a groundbreaking soldier might finally tip the balance in the Imperium's favor. On other days, I see grim warnings that meddling too deeply with the human form has historically come with a staggering cost. For me, the most compelling part of all these whispers and alleged evidence is how they reflect the Imperium's overall state of mind. People sense the relentless pressure closing in from every sector, and they're hungry for signs of new strength. Even if a portion of these rumors is exaggerated or downright fabricated, it says a lot about the collective longing for a miracle cure to the Imperium's woes. That's why they're gaining traction. This setting thrives on the concept of just one more chance, one last shot at reclaiming a fraction of what's been lost. At the end of the day, whether the rumors prove to be true or just another elaborate piece of fandom lore, they speak to the enduring fascination with secret projects and the idea that somewhere, in the darkest corners of the Imperium, the future of humanity is being shaped in clandestine labs. It's impossible not to get caught up in the hype, especially when each new day brings another unconfirmed snippet that might, just might, be the key to unraveling this mystery. For now, I'm content to keep my ear to the ground, hoping that sooner or later, some tangible proof surfaces to confirm or debunk these tantalizing tales. I've always found it fascinating how, across the entire Imperium, you've got this constant push and pull between preserving humanity's pure form and embracing radical enhancement to survive the galaxy's horrors. At the heart of these whispers about a new wave of super-soldiers is precisely that tension. Are we looking at a purely genetic leap forward, or is it more of a hybrid approach, welding advanced biomechanics onto already improved human stock? A lot of folks say that if these rumored super-soldiers exist, they likely represent some unholy synergy of both. After all, the Imperium spent millennia fiddling with gene seed, but in a galaxy as brutal as this, raw genetics alone sometimes just isn't enough. One recurring theory I've seen is that the gene seed base might have been drastically modified beyond traditional Astartes patterns. People talk about splicing in traits that go beyond what's normally tolerated, like greater psychic resistance or the ability to thrive in the vacuum of space for extended periods. There's even chatter about introducing Xenos-derived genetic material, which is normally the ultimate taboo. While mainstream fans dismiss that as crossing an unthinkable line, there's always that rebellious minority who argue that the Adeptus Mechanicus, or maybe some radical inquisitors, have no qualms about bending or outright breaking the rules if it yields results. And in the grim darkness of the far future, moral boundaries tend to blur quicker than we'd like. Meanwhile, the idea of biomechanical augmentation draws just as much attention. We've seen what can happen when technology merges with flesh. Just look at some of the more heavily modified tech priests. But imagine applying a fraction of that to a specialized soldier, custom-fitting entire limbs or vital organs to not only boost combat potential, but also improve resilience. I see some fans speculating that these rumored super soldiers might not need the same puberty-era organ implantation processes that define the Space Marines. Maybe these new warriors can be grown rapidly in gene vats, then fitted with high-grade cybernetics once they're old enough or stable enough. It sounds terrifying in scope, but in a universe where entire sectors can fall to alien invasions overnight, maybe that's the cost of staying afloat. I've come across theories suggesting the Imperium's biotech is far more advanced than it lets on. Most official channels claim technology has regressed or is carefully restricted, but the Adeptus Mechanicus has always hoarded knowledge like a dragon guarding treasure. If half the rumors are true, these new super soldiers might benefit from secret vaults of data that date all the way back to the dark age of technology, ancient formulas and schematics no one dares to speak of openly. It's tantalizing to imagine what might be possible if a group of Magos biologists got hold of that information and began tinkering without the usual limitations. Some fans daydream about soldiers equipped with subdermal plating, synthetic muscles that never tire, or multi-lung systems capable of operating in sulfuric or radioactive environments without a hiccup. In terms of mental conditioning, we all know how crucial it is for any frontline warrior to have a psyche capable of withstanding the madness of warp-fueled battlefields. Standard Astartes rely on psycho-indoctrination to maintain unwavering loyalty and discipline. Now, imagine combining that same mental molding with neural implants that deliver real-time tactical data, or doping the brain with chemical enhancers that keep focus razor-sharp even in the thick of a demon incursion. I've seen some fans express alarm at the possibility that such mind sculpting could produce blank slate killing machines, soldiers who act more like living weapons than human beings. Yet others see it as an inevitable outcome in a galaxy where hesitation or mercy can spell extinction. It's a grim trade-off, but one that feels disturbingly plausible. Some folks argue that, logistically, these experimental super soldiers would likely be fewer in number than Space Marines, at least during the initial phases. After all, we're talking about a massive resource drain, not to mention top-of-the-line technology that can't be mass-produced in most forges. So if they exist, maybe they're deployed in surgical strikes or as the ultimate test units, quietly hitting key targets to see how they fare before the Imperium commits fully to this path. A buddy of mine is convinced that these advanced troops could be the start of a whole new branch under the direct oversight of an inquisitorial or Mechanicus faction. He's constantly pointing out that such a central authority would be necessary to maintain the secrecy and ensure consistent quality control across all experiments. Of course, the ethical concerns come up often in these discussions. Warhammer 40K isn't exactly known for upholding a pristine moral code, but there's a line somewhere. Still, when you're facing horrors that erase entire star systems in a matter of weeks, fans wonder if the Imperium's leadership feels it's justified to push boundaries that would have been unthinkable in earlier eras. There's a chilling notion that maybe these rumored experiments are less about vanity or ambition and more about existential necessity. If that's the case, we might be looking at an Imperium that's willing to fully abandon any last vestige of restraint, so long as it means humanity endures. On the flip side, some people posit that these rumored super soldiers might come with an inherent flaw. Maybe there's a trade-off to all that augmentation, a shortened lifespan, or an instability that causes them to degrade over time. That would mirror the fate of the Thunder Warriors, but on a smaller scale. The Imperium might accept that sacrifice if it means achieving tactical dominance in critical battles. Fans who support that line of thinking see it as yet another example of the Imperium's grim practicality. Create unstoppable fighters, deploy them ruthlessly, and deal with the consequences later. It's a bleak outlook, but it fits right in with the universe's ethos. What I find most striking, though, is how each new rumor about genetic or biomechanical breakthroughs sparks these intense debates about what it means to be human in the first place. Some folks hold on to the belief that human essence is something that needs protecting, even in a world as merciless as the 41st millennium. Others shrug and argue that the Imperium is a machine of survival, shaped by countless wars, and humanity lost its right to purity centuries ago. The possibility of forging a soldier both biologically and mechanically enhanced touches on a deep chord in the fandom. The idea that maybe we're on the brink of transcending our species' limitations, even if it means stepping into a future that's half man, half something else entirely. That's the crux of it, really. Do we take this rumored new generation of super soldiers as a sign of hope, or the final nail in humanity's coffin? While the official lore remains silent, the questions keep piling up. Even if the rumors turn out to be overblown, the fact that so many people are willing to believe in such a program says a lot about the Imperium's precarious place in the galaxy. In that sense, the debate over genetics and biomechanics isn't just about building bigger, stronger fighters. It's a reflection of a civilization that's been fighting tooth and nail for survival for millennia, now teetering on the edge of desperation. One day we might get the real answer, maybe with official confirmation that the Imperium has indeed gambled on forging these monstrous new warriors. Until then, all we can do is piece together the fragments of rumor and conjecture, and wonder if the Imperium's next step is one that pushes it over the brink of humanity into something else altogether. I find it fascinating how each of the Imperium's major power blocks seems to carry a particular motive or fear when it comes to whispers of a hidden super soldier program. It's a common belief among fans that the Adeptus Mechanicus, with its insatiable curiosity for lost technologies, would be at the forefront of any large-scale experiment. They're forever chasing fragments of ancient knowledge that might restore a glimmer of the legendary Dark Age of technology. Some hobbyists swear that Mechanicus cells operating off the grid could easily funnel resources into a covert project, hiding it behind the labyrinthine bureaucracy of Forge Worlds. The question, then, isn't whether they'd be involved, but how deeply. Maybe they're the architects, bending genetics and biomechanics to their iron will, or perhaps they're just the key suppliers of arcane equipment. Whatever the case, it's hard to imagine they'd sit on the sidelines and let someone else tinker with the building blocks of the human species. At the same time, the Inquisition looms over everything like a silent sentinel, ready to pounce the moment something smells of heresy. In the fan community, people speculate that certain radical inquisitors might actually be championing these endeavors, pushing them behind closed doors while strictly controlling which secrets get out. If you think about it, the Inquisition's primary mandate is to safeguard humanity from existential threats, be they xenos, demonic, or internal corruption. There are plenty of theories that an Inquisitor who's convinced the Imperium stands on the brink of collapse might endorse or even spearhead such a super soldier program. After all, if they genuinely believe these rumored warriors could turn the tide of war, moral qualms would take a back seat to the overarching goal of safeguarding the species. On the flip side, some Inquisitors would be horrified by any whiff of genetic manipulation that strays beyond standard boundaries, and you can bet that conflict would play out in secret inquisitorial chambers where the stakes are as high as they come. Rumors also swirl about how the ecclesiarchy might react if it caught wind of this alleged project. The official doctrine of the Imperial cult preaches devotion to the Emperor above all else, and tampering too deeply with humanity's essence can be viewed as playing God. Still, nobody can ignore the fact that the ecclesiarchy wields tremendous influence over the faithful masses. That leads some fans to propose that perhaps the church is being deliberately kept out of the loop, ensuring the project remains a purely military and scientific affair. Others insist a few high-ranking cardinals might be in the know, even endorsing it behind closed doors because, in the grand scheme, bolstering the Imperium's might could be interpreted as enacting the Emperor's divine will. It's a moral tightrope walk, and it fits perfectly with the universe's never-ending cycle of hypocrisy and desperate measures. One of the more out-there theories floating around is that entire star systems could be cordoned off as experimental grounds under the guise of quarantine or strategic realignment. A lot of fans imagine a scenario where you've got entire planetary populations unknowingly supporting a hush-hush facility tucked away beneath a hive city or hidden deep in the wastelands of a dead moon. Some believe these enclaves are seeded with black-budget fortifications run by a small cadre of Mechanicus Magi, who answer only to a handful of powerful inquisitorial or High Lords representatives. Think about the scale the Imperium operates on. It's so vast that an entire planet could vanish from official records and hardly anyone would notice. That idea alone is enough to keep me up at night, mulling over the possibility that we'll never see official proof of such sites until they decide it's time to deploy whatever they've been brewing. From there, fan speculation branches out into wild territory. Maybe entire fleets operate under false flags, shuttling test subjects and vital supplies to these hidden labs. Some folks picture an entire rogue branch of the Imperium's military cooperating with Mechanicus scientists, enforced by inquisitorial kill teams that ensure absolute secrecy. If there's even a shred of truth to that, it means the scope of these covert operations might rival the biggest Imperial campaigns, except nobody is aware of it on the outside. It's exactly the sort of labyrinthine conspiracy that Warhammer 40K fans love, equal parts terrifying and addictive. You can practically see the potential for a massive reveal in the future, a brand new force emerging from the shadows to challenge a galaxy-threatening foe, claiming they were cultivated and perfected in the Emperor's name. Of course, not everyone believes these conspiracies, or at least they think the scale is overblown. There's a strong contingent of fans who argue the Imperium is too fragmented and bureaucratically choked to coordinate such a massive Black Ops endeavor without major leaks. Even if the Adeptus Mechanicus and some Inquisitors have the expertise and zeal, you'd still need secure shipping lanes, mountains of raw materials, and untold manpower. They point out that anything that large would spark more than rumor. Actual evidence would surface. Yet the Warhammer 40K setting is precisely where the line between impossible and inevitable gets blurry. After all, the Imperium has a track record of pulling off colossal feats while its populations toil in near-total ignorance. Another angle is the possibility of interfaction rivalry. Suppose the Adeptus Mechanicus is angling to create Supersoldiers that reflect a certain vision of the Omnissiah's will. Meanwhile, a group of Inquisitors might have their own criteria, shaped by centuries of analyzing threats beyond standard comprehension. If both groups have a stake in shaping this rumored new breed of warriors, there might be competing labs, each believing their approach is superior or more faithful to the Emperor's grand plan. Fans love to imagine how that clash would play out: sabotage missions, clandestine data heists, or subtle political moves among the High Lords to secure funding. It's the stuff of riveting stories, and it could explain why the final product, if it ever emerges, might be a patchwork of different doctrines and enhancements, each reflecting a distinct faction's influence. Ultimately, nobody can say for certain which institution is pulling the most strings, or whether the scope of these covert operations is as vast as the rumors claim. The Imperium is this colossal beast, riddled with labyrinths of secrecy and silent power struggles, so it's entirely plausible there's a hidden effort as big as people make it out to be. At the same time, it's not hard to dismiss a fair amount of it as wishful thinking or the product of a fandom enthralled by the idea that something groundbreaking is just around the corner. The only universal agreement is that if a project of such magnitude exists, it would have needed powerful patrons, the kind who can bend entire institutions to their will. And in this galaxy, that's not just possible, it's practically guaranteed if the right combination of ambition and desperation converges. For me, it's the uncertainty that makes it so thrilling. All these puzzle pieces might be part of a grand design, or they could be random bits of cosmic noise. Until we see these super soldiers emerge into the wider war zones, we're left guessing which powerful hands hold the reins, and whether they should be trusted with humanity's fate. I've always been struck by how the Imperium likes to paint itself as a bastion of faith and duty. But then you see all these hints that it's prepared to cross every line imaginable, if that means clinging to survival. On the surface, the Imperium's religious fervor preaches purity, obedience, and unwavering devotion to the Emperor's doctrines. Yet beneath that, you've got centuries of quiet compromises, where moral boundaries blur in the face of existential threats. This rumored super soldier project is a perfect illustration of that tension. If the rumors are true, it's hard to ignore how deeply it challenges the Imperium's own stated ideals. I mean, how can a civilization claim to uphold the Emperor's holy vision when it's apparently willing to gamble with the most fundamental aspects of humanity? Some fans argue that desperation is the Imperium's default state. They see it as a government under perpetual siege, forced into making grim decisions just to stop the entire species from being swept away. In their eyes, you can't judge the Imperium by the same moral standard you would a more peaceful society. There's simply no breathing room. When I read those kinds of comments, I can't help but picture entire star systems going dark from one crisis or another, and it's easier to see why radical solutions might start to look downright sensible. After all, if the alternative is total annihilation, any measure, even one that strays into monstrous territory, might suddenly seem worth attempting. That's the bleak logic a lot of fans use to defend the possibility that a new super soldier program could exist despite the obvious ethical pitfalls. Then again, there's a lingering sense of horror in the community when we consider what progress really entails in a regime like the Imperium. It's one thing to refine an existing template, like the Space Marines, who at least have some measure of honor and tradition anchoring them. It's quite another to push beyond the boundaries the Emperor himself set, potentially creating beings that border on post-human or even borderline heretical. If the Imperium is systematically creating soldiers with no regard for their personal agency, or possibly splicing in elements once deemed forbidden, it raises the question of whether the Emperor's grand legacy is being sacrificed on the altar of wartime expediency. That's where the real moral rub lies. Is forging a perfect killing machine worth hollowing out what's left of the Imperium's soul? I've read some forum threads where people debate whether the average citizen of the Imperium would even blink at these rumored experiments. Most likely, they'd never know, and if they did, the state's propaganda could spin it as a holy endeavor, an extension of the Emperor's unending quest to protect humanity. But for those closer to the gears of power, like certain chapter masters, inquisitorial agents, or planetary governors, the moral burden might be excruciating. Imagine knowing you're complicit in the creation of warriors who've been subjected to unimaginable procedures, possibly devoid of free will, yet praising them as the Imperium's finest champions. It's a big leap from venerating the Astartes who, at least in principle, volunteer and undergo spiritual rites to endorsing a clandestine process that might churn out living weapons in assembly line fashion. Another angle fans love to explore is how these extremes might trigger schisms within the Imperium. Suppose news of these experimental warriors leaked out. You can picture entire factions branding the project heresy, condemning the architects as no different from chaos cultists who twist flesh and mind without restraint. Others might rally to the program's defense, claiming it's the only path to salvation. The debate would ripple through the ecclesiarchy, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the Inquisition, leading to covert rivalries and maybe even open conflict in the shadows. That brand of moral and ethical split is part of what keeps people so hooked on Warhammer 40K's lore. Whenever the Imperium sets off down a dark path, it risks tearing itself apart from within. I'm also fascinated by how some fans bring up the Emperor's original vision from way back in the days of unification on Terra and question whether this rumored super soldier initiative reflects his true legacy or contradicts it entirely. Did the Emperor want humanity to evolve under his guidance, or was his plan to maintain a delicate balance between extraordinary defenders like the Astartes and the core human population? Nobody can say for certain. There's so much lost information, and the Imperium we see now is a far cry from those early times. Still, the mere possibility that we're crossing a moral boundary the Emperor himself might have avoided is enough to inspire fierce debate. A number of fans even point out the moral hazard of success. If the Imperium manages to create a shockingly effective new soldier, there's a risk it doubles down on that method, fueling an endless cycle of increasingly extreme genetic and cybernetic enhancements. Once you start heading down that path, when do you stop? Is there a moment when you look in the mirror and realize that you've become the very thing you once claimed to stand against? An empire that manipulates bodies and minds without mercy? Some say that line has already been crossed. Others believe it's still on the horizon, waiting to be decisively breached if these rumors prove true. From a storytelling standpoint, the moral gray area is both unsettling and incredibly compelling. In the end, these ethical quandaries boil down to one central dilemma. Does the Imperium's perpetual war justify any means necessary? For a long time, the official narrative has been yes, so long as the Emperor's divine mandate is upheld. But there's a difference between waging war with the tools you already have versus forging entirely new nightmares behind closed doors. Personally, I find that if these rumors about emerging super soldiers hold even a fraction of truth, it underscores just how far the Imperium has drifted from anything we might label as idealism. Survival at all costs can leave a civilization twisted beyond recognition. Then again, maybe that's the point. In a galaxy that knows no mercy, perhaps the Imperium can't afford ideals. It might only have the cold comfort of victory, purchased at a terrible price. Still, I can't shake a certain uneasy feeling when I imagine these ultimate soldiers stepping onto a battlefield, unstoppable and unquestioning, crafted through methods that might be horrifying if exposed to the light of day. It's a potent reminder that the Imperium's greatest strength, its ability to adapt and endure, also risks eroding the very principles it purports to defend. That underlying contradiction sits at the heart of the Warhammer 40K universe, and these rumors about a next-level super soldier project highlight it all too well. Whether these extremes truly undermine the Imperium's ideals or just lay bare the darker truths of its survival strategies is something fans will keep debating until we see final proof one way or another. For now, it's enough to know that in a place as ruthless as the 41st millennium, moral lines remain dreadfully easy to cross. The galaxy is a ravenous beast, always hungry for the next tipping point that could swing fortunes one way or another. Imagining a new breed of super soldiers suddenly stepping onto this stage is like dropping a grenade into an already chaotic mix. Every major threat the Imperium faces, whether it's the hordes of chaos, the relentless tide of xeno-species, or even rebellions festering from within, might find itself at a major disadvantage if these enhanced warriors live up to the rumors. It's not just about brute strength either. It's about the psychological shock of encountering a force that goes beyond everything these enemies have come to expect from humanity. One angle that comes up again and again is the war against chaos. An average mortal's will can buckle under the corruption that seeps from the warp, and even the staunchest defenders aren't immune to temptation or madness. Space Marines already possess a level of mental and spiritual fortitude that sets them apart, but fans speculate that a new generation of super soldiers could be engineered with an even more rigorous anti-chaos design. Maybe they have specialized brain implants that dampen the effect of demonic influence, or gene-spliced traits granting heightened resistance to psychic attacks. If true, That shift would be a nightmare scenario for chaos cults, which often rely on infiltration or spiritual decay to undermine defenders long before the real fighting begins. A legion of warriors simply unyielding in faith and mind could force chaos to adapt in ways it hasn't had to for millennia. In the context of Xenos threats, the ripple effect might be equally dramatic. Look at the Tyranids, for example. They're a swarm that overpowers through endless numbers and terrifying adaptability. If the Imperium fields a new type of super soldier specifically tailored to counter the hive mind's usual tactics, it might disrupt the entire dynamic of those invasions. Some fans dream of advanced genetic markers that mask a soldier's biometrics, making it harder for Tyranid synapse creatures to identify and target them. There's also talk of these soldiers wielding weapons optimized for each Xenos species, switched out like you'd change magazines. Even if it all sounds too good to be true, the possibility that these new warriors could hold off a swarm longer or strike deeper into Tyranid strongholds might buy precious time the Imperium so desperately needs. And that alone would shift the strategic calculus in countless war zones. Take the Orcs, who thrive on straightforward, brutal combat. They might relish the challenge of facing bigger, badder humans. At first, you'd think a new breed of super soldiers would just feed the Orcs' thirst for a real scrap. But if these Imperium fighters stand on equal footing with no-B or war bosses, suddenly Orc mobs might lose one of their key advantages: sheer physical dominance. Sure, Orcs have brute strength and unbreakable morale, but if they come up against a force that can match them muscle for muscle and add disciplined tactics into the mix, the typical Orc crush 'em approach might see an unprecedented setback. It's not that Orcs would fear them. Fear isn't in their vocabulary. But the Orc tide might find itself taking heavier losses or being outmaneuvered by soldiers who can outbrawl the average boy and outthink the war boss. Then there are the technologically advanced factions like the Tau or the Necrons. In those cases, raw power often takes a back seat to sophisticated weaponry or near-immortal resilience. Yet, if the Imperium's secret warriors incorporated cutting-edge bionics or some brand-new defensive protocols, you could see them parrying Tau plasma fire more effectively or enduring the Necrons' Gauss flares longer than a standard trooper ever could. Some fans imagine these super soldiers having inbuilt tech that allows them to interface with certain battlefield systems, effectively anticipating moves faster than even the sharpest fire warrior. As for Necrons, a heightened regenerative factor might offset the slow disintegration that makes Gauss weapons so deadly. While it's a tall order, Necrons are notoriously tough. The mere notion of matching their resilience is enough to excite those who think the Imperium has grown stagnant in the face of ancient foes. As for internal threats, that's where things get a little dicey. Because if the Imperium unleashes a new breed of super soldiers, it's not just Chaos or Xenos that need to watch out. Heretical uprisings, renegade planetary governors, or even rebellious guard regiments could suddenly find themselves facing a unit of unstoppable enforcers who don't hesitate or tire. On the surface, it sounds like an effective safeguard. Quell any insurrection before it blooms. But it also raises the possibility that these super soldiers become a wild card in the Imperium's own power struggles. Some fans worry that giving any one faction an elite kill team might invite more shadow wars within the Imperium's ranks, with each side trying to harness or suppress this new force for its own ends. Still, from a purely military standpoint, introducing these specialized fighters to quell large-scale rebellions could free up entire Space Marine chapters for more critical crusades elsewhere. One aspect that really fires people's imaginations is the thought that these super soldiers might excel in smaller, more clandestine operations as well as full-scale wars. If they're truly more adaptable than standard Marines, they could transition seamlessly from infiltration missions to pitched battles. Against a foe like Genestealer cults, for instance, infiltration is key. Finding and eradicating the cult patriarch can save a planet from total infestation. If these new warriors are adept at blending in or pulling off surgical strikes with minimal detection, That could stop a cult from ever reaching critical mass, a game changer in how the Imperium handles these insidious threats. Fans also debate whether the mere rumor of such a project might be a weapon in itself. If Chaos warbands or Xenos warlords start believing the Imperium has these terrifying new soldiers, they could overextend their own strategies trying to counter them. Some warbands might refocus on capturing gene labs or forging alliances with rival factions, fearful that if they don't unite now, they'll be overwhelmed later. Others might launch risky offensives in an attempt to strike before the Imperium's rumored shock troops are fully operational. Either way, the psychological component can't be dismissed. The Warhammer 40K galaxy thrives on intimidation, and a whisper of a new apex predator can cause entire strategies to shift, even if those whispers aren't fully accurate. All this leads some fans to conclude that if these super soldiers ever truly emerge, the Imperium might temporarily gain an unprecedented edge in certain theaters of war. But there's always a catch, isn't there? The Imperium's enemies are nothing if not relentless. Whenever a new strength appears on the battlefield, someone finds a countermeasure. Chaos might devise corruptive tactics that target the unique genetics of these soldiers, turning them against their comrades. A Xenos race might develop specialized biotech or specialized war gear that neutralizes specific enhancements. Even the Imperium's own cutthroat politics could hamper large-scale deployment, as different factions jockey for control of these powerful assets. Still, in a universe as merciless as this one, any advantage can mean the difference between holding a vital sector or losing another million souls to the void. Whether these rumored super soldiers would be the ultimate game changer or just another tool in an endless arsenal remains up for debate, but it's impossible not to get swept up in the potential. The Imperium has yearned for a miracle that could tilt the battlefield in its favor for ages, and if these creatures of gene lore and bionic wizardry do walk among us, the next great conflict might not unfold the way anyone expects. In a setting defined by towering heroes and monstrous villains, a brand new breed of warriors could write the next chapter in blood and iron, forever altering the balance of power in humanity's favor, or plunging it into an even deeper abyss if it all goes wrong. I've noticed that one of the biggest divides in these discussions is between those who think all this talk of new super soldiers is little more than strategic misinformation, and those who believe it's the logical next step in humanity's story. The disinformation crowd often points out how the Imperium thrives on secrecy and misdirection, especially when it comes to unifying the populace or keeping potential enemies guessing. If you're an Imperial commander facing insurmountable odds, letting slip a few rumors about invincible warriors might be a crafty psychological ploy to bolster morale and scare off opportunistic foes. There's also speculation that certain intelligence branches plant these rumors deliberately, ensuring that heretical cults or Xenos agents waste resources chasing phantoms. Fans who favor this angle argue that if the Imperium was truly creating a new breed of super soldiers, it wouldn't be so careless as to let rumors leak out so freely, or at least not without a calculated purpose. Some supporters of the disinformation theory go even further. They'll tell you that the Imperium is rife with infighting, making it plausible that one faction might fabricate sensational stories to mislead rivals, all while securing their own power base. Suppose you're a radical inquisitor wanting to draw attention away from your real project. What better method than fueling hype about an entirely different initiative, so other inquisitorial branches or the Adeptus Mechanicus waste their time investigating? After all, nothing gets Warhammer 40K fans more excited than the notion of secret gene labs hidden on remote fortress worlds. It's almost too perfect a smokescreen. And that's precisely why these naysayers believe it's all part of a grand stage play, authentic sounding enough to keep us guessing, but ultimately hollow. Yet there's a sizable group that says the rumors fit the Imperium's pattern of relentless innovation, no matter how draconian or hidden away it might be. They'll point to the evolution from the Thunder Warriors to the Astartes as a natural progression, despite how morally dubious or perilous it was. For them, it only makes sense that, given the current state of crisis, the Imperium would take gene tinkering and biomechanical augmentation to even greater extremes. Every new wave of conflict, be it chaos surges, tyrannid swarms, or awakening Necron dynasties, demands a recalibration of the Imperium's approach. If survival is on the line, why wouldn't they push the boundaries again? To these believers, the idea of a new super soldier project isn't just plausible, it feels downright inevitable, like the next chapter in a never-ending arms race. I've come across folks who argue that such an inevitable evolution is precisely how the Imperium endures. They lean on the fact that, for all its stagnation and rigid dogmas, the Imperium has historically shown flashes of daring innovation whenever it's faced truly existential threats. The Great Crusade, the founding of specialized chapters, the creation of the Grey Knights, each emerged from a necessity so dire that it overrode the usual fanaticism about staying faithful to ancient designs. In that light, fans see these rumored super soldiers as simply the Imperium's next leap forward, ironically fulfilling the Emperor's old ambition of guiding humanity to ever higher pinnacles of strength. The risk of moral compromise or unpredictable side effects takes a backseat to that burning need for a trump card against the galaxy's horrors. There's also a fascinating middle ground where people don't entirely buy into the inevitability, but don't dismiss the possibility of disinformation either. They say the rumors might contain partial truths, perhaps seeds of real projects that have been exaggerated or misrepresented over time. If a few labs are toying with borderline ideas, trying out gene-enhanced auxiliaries or advanced cybernetic implants, then whispered rumors could spiral out of control as each retelling makes the soldiers more monstrous, more unstoppable. In that scenario, maybe the Imperium genuinely is tinkering with a next-generation fighter, but on a far smaller or less ambitious scale than the rumors suggest. In the swirling chaos of Warhammer 40K, half-truths often hold the most compelling kernel of reality. Interestingly, some fans point to the old adage that any rumor persisting for long enough in the Imperium tends to have some foundation, even if it's minuscule. They remind us that secrets can't stay buried forever. Maybe it's just a matter of time before we see a black armored unit show up in official lore, or maybe we'll catch a fleeting reference in a new codex that lines up too neatly with these theories to be a coincidence. On the flip side, if the Imperium's truly orchestrating a sophisticated disinformation campaign, they might feed us just enough believable details to keep the rumor alive without ever confirming it. That tension has basically become part of the fun. People scour every snippet of text or newly revealed artwork, hoping to catch a glimpse of evidence that either confirms the rumor or exposes it as a grand hoax. All these arguments bounce back and forth endlessly in fan circles. Some hold tight to the skepticism that it's all smoke and mirrors designed to distract from actual weaknesses. Others stand firm in their conviction that the Imperium's relentless survival instinct has led it to break ground on something extraordinary. What fascinates me most is how the rumor alone brings out such passion in the community. It's a testament to how deeply the Warhammer 40K setting resonates when it comes to playing with big, dramatic ideas about progress, faith, and extinction-level threats. In the end, we're left with a question that defines the grim darkness of the far future. Does humanity's struggle for survival push it inevitably toward extremes? Or is that narrative itself just another manipulative tool wielded by those in power? For now, the debate rages on, and every new speculation or leaked source only fuels the fire. It's a conspiracy-laden thrill ride that might just hold the seeds of a shocking revelation. Or, like so many stories in this galaxy, it could be yet another dead end, swallowed up by the Imperium's vast ocean of secrets. I've heard a lot of speculation pointing to a handful of shadowy figures said to be the real architects of this rumored super soldier effort. One name that keeps cropping up is Inquisitor Harridan Thule. Enthusiasts describe Thule as a radical with obscure allegiances, someone who's walked a razor-thin line between sanctioned research and outright heresy. Some claim he was once a member of the Ordo Xenos, making him well-versed in alien biology, exactly the sort of knowledge that might prove invaluable for crafting new genetic enhancements. Supposedly, he got his start dissecting defeated tyrannid organisms, learning how their physiology adapts so fluidly, and that fascination morphed into a personal obsession with using Xenos traits to forge stronger humans. If that's not enough to raise eyebrows, the rumors also say that Thule is rumored to have vanished from the typical inquisitorial circuit, with no official record explaining his disappearance. Naturally, that only fans the flames. He must be holed up in a hidden lab somewhere, quietly perfecting whatever twisted prototypes he's managed to cook up. Meanwhile, the Adeptus Mechanicus side of the story often points to Magos Zephira Helios, an eccentric biologist figure about whom official data is virtually non-existent. Hardcore hobbyists argue this is intentional. If Helios really is tinkering with gene seed or advanced implants well beyond established protocols, her work would be classified at the highest levels. Some folks say she once carried out invasive surgical procedures on live orc war bosses to extract their regenerative capacity, and that she's uncomfortably comfortable with unusual materials gleaned from newly discovered xenotech. Helios apparently heads a cluster of biologist enclaves rumored to lie under the surface of a devastated forge world, a place where the environment itself is so toxic that only machines and heavily augmented staff can dwell there. The few who claim to have glimpsed Helios's domain describe row upon row of suspended vats, each containing an embryonic shape that can't quite be pinned down as wholly human. Whether these are early failures or near-finished breakthroughs is anyone's guess, but it sure gives me chills just thinking about it. Then there's Lord Militant Aurelius Voss, a name that pops up in hushed discussions whenever someone mentions the High Lords. Officially, Voss is just another hero of the Imperium, credited with turning the tide on multiple besieged worlds. But I've bumped into threads alleging that he was promoted under suspicious circumstances, right after leading a Black Ops campaign that never appears on any standard record. The theory goes that he witnessed something during that operation, a glimpse of advanced gene crafting or a trove of archaic technologies, and he made a secret pact with powerful Mechanicus figures in exchange for personal gains. If you believe the rumors, Voss has been funneling entire shipments of gene seed and exotic resources to undisclosed destinations, all while weaving a narrative of logistical necessity for the front lines. The idea that a Lord Militant might be complicit in something so far removed from standard warfare is controversial, but fans keep pointing out that the upper echelons of the Imperium can sometimes twist standard operating procedures for the greater good, especially if they're convinced it's the only way to stave off disaster. There's also talk of a certain rogue priest of the ecclesiarchy named Cardinal Morton Myril. He's said to be a fervent believer that the Emperor's will can manifest through radical innovation, a stance so unusual for a high-ranking ecclesiastical figure that it's practically heretical. According to rumor, Myril finances Helios's labs, or perhaps even acts as an intermediary between Thule and Voss. Some say Myril's personal retinue includes augmented bodyguards whose presence is shrouded in unwavering silence and blank-eyed devotion. Nobody knows if they're early test subjects or something else entirely. The notion of a cardinal investing in a clandestine super-soldier program really sets people off, but in a universe defined by strange bedfellows, maybe it's not that far-fetched. Whether it's driven by his own fanaticism or by a genuine belief that the Emperor demands a more perfected class of servants, Myril's rumored involvement implies that these schemes might stretch into the highest spiritual circles of the Imperium. I've even come across a few bizarre mentions of a figure allegedly too old to be human, someone named the Revenant Magister. Nobody can agree if this entity is a singular person or a title passed down across generations. What's really unnerving is the suggestion that it embodies ancient knowledge predating even the Emperor's ascendancy, derived from black technologies gleaned from hidden corners of the galaxy. Some of the more dramatic storytellers say the Revenant Magister harvests the minds of dying psychers, extracting their memories and forging them into some arcane blueprint for the perfect soldier. It sounds outlandish, but this is Warhammer 40K we're talking about, and the more insane a rumor seems, the more it tends to spark speculation. Maybe the Revenant Magister is just a legend meant to scare the faithful, but if not, that's exactly the sort of puppet master you'd expect behind a project like this. What intrigues me most is how these rumored leaders might interlock, each possessing a crucial piece of the puzzle. Thul's knowledge of Xenos physiology, Helios's mastery of gene forging, Voss's logistical reach, Myral's religious backing, and the Revenant Magister's unholy well of secrets. It sounds almost scripted, but fans can't get enough of it. It's like the ultimate cloak and dagger ensemble, each with their own reasons for gambling on a new super soldier program. Maybe they operate in isolation, or maybe they formed a secret coalition where each member contributes expertise and resources in exchange for a slice of the final product. Knowing how Warhammer 40K politics go, it's equally possible that one or more are plotting to betray the others once the project bears fruit. Of course, it might all be hearsay, an ever-growing tapestry of rumor that stitches together disparate tidbits from codices, short stories, and half-glimpsed illustrations. It's easy to see why people run with it. The Imperium's a place where individuals of staggering power can shape entire wars with a single decision, so the idea that a select few are quietly cultivating the next step in human evolution feels almost natural. Each new bit of lore only seems to add another puzzle piece, tempting us to believe these personalities really are out there, concealed behind a web of classified operations and carefully staged deceptions. Maybe one day, a future narrative release will reveal the truth, or maybe these names will stay in the realm of rumor forever, fueling campfire stories about the day the Imperium dared to rewrite the genetic destiny of mankind. Until then, all we can do is wonder who might be calling the shots, and whether their vision will save humanity or push it even further into the darkness. It's wild how many conspiracy angles spring up whenever a rumor about secret super soldiers starts doing the rounds. I've seen everything from folks claiming they found coded messages in the flavor text of certain campaign books, to outlandish theories that there's a secret fortress world where entire battalions of these next-gen soldiers are already in active training. Some fans eat it up like candy, dissecting every syllable of lore for hidden meaning, while others roll their eyes and label it all wishful thinking. Still, every time a new whistleblower appears on a forum, or a so-called inside leak hits the rumor mill, the community collectively loses its mind trying to figure out if this is the final piece of proof we've been waiting for, or just another elaborate hoax. One of the more bizarre conspiracy theories I've seen posits that the Imperium deliberately peppers codex releases with cryptic references. The argument goes that these references act as a trial balloon to gauge the reaction before unveiling something massive. I've bumped into threads where people stitch together lines from different source books, convinced they form a hidden narrative about newly developed gene lines. Of course, official statements are nowhere to be found, which only fuels the speculation. Skeptics contend that this is nothing more than marketing sleight of hand, a way to stir up hype without any actual substance. But the believers go all in, constructing timelines and cross-referencing planet names to chart the project's alleged progress. It's borderline detective work, and a big chunk of the fan base can't resist the thrill of the chase. Then you get the so-called inside leaks, where someone swears up and down they've got a buddy in the Mechanicus or an inquisitorial contact who spilled the beans. 9 times out of 10, it's impossible to verify these claims, and they often vanish under a pile of skepticism. Occasionally, though, a leak will match up oddly well with some obscure detail in existing lore, and that's when the real fireworks begin. Suddenly, the entire community mobilizes, revisiting everything they thought they knew and debating whether these puzzle pieces fit too perfectly to be coincidence. Naturally, there are calls for calm, A handful of posters point out that the Warhammer 40K setting is so vast and cryptic that it's easy to force connections where none actually exist. But those warnings rarely stop the hype train once it leaves the station. A popular angle is that the Imperium itself might be seeding different rumor threads to keep enemies on their toes. This idea has fans picturing teams of Imperial agents posting in shady corners of the data sphere, concocting half-true stories about unstoppable supersoldiers so that orc war bosses or chaos lords waste time prepping for a threat that might not be real, or might be real, but not in the way they fear. The notion of a puppet master using the fan community as a pawn in some grand misinformation game feels wonderfully meta, and some folks absolutely love that sense of cosmic-scale trickery. Others call it over-the-top paranoia, but in a universe where espionage and cunning can decide entire planetary fates, it's not too far off the mark to imagine. We also have people pointing to wild coincidences as evidence. You'll see a random piece of artwork featuring unfamiliar heraldry on a suit of advanced power armor. Then you'll see a short story referencing a classified gene lab, and next thing you know, fans are drawing lines between them as if it's the genealogical chart of a secret Astartes chapter. One side says it's obviously building a case for these rumored supersoldiers. The other side chides them for reading tea leaves where none exist, reminding everyone that Warhammer 40K is a patchwork of countless authors and artists who aren't necessarily coordinating some hidden agenda. This back and forth feels like an endless tug of war, with each new clue either heralded as the smoking gun or shrugged off as random synergy. Of course, no conspiracy frenzy would be complete without personal testimonies. Occasionally, someone claims they actually saw one of these rumored soldiers in the flesh on a remote battlefield or a hidden forge. Naturally, these accounts are loaded with dramatic flair. They describe a towering figure surpassing even Space Marine proportions, moving with eerie grace. Or maybe a savant-like intelligence that leaves veteran commanders in awe. Reliable? Probably not. But Warhammer 40K has always thrived on tall tales, and the bigger the rumor, the bigger the wave of discussion that follows. Some fans treat these stories as cautionary folklore, while others see them as glimpses of what might be lying just beneath the surface. Reactions to all this range from gleeful excitement to downright cynicism. There's a segment of the fan base that thrives on the idea of hidden storylines waiting to be uncovered, so they enthusiastically encourage more speculation, more digging, and more leaps of logic. Another group, jaded by too many rumor cycles that led nowhere, tries to pour cold water on the hype. For them, chasing these conspiracies is part of the fun, but they maintain a healthy skepticism. They'll jump into discussions to say, "Remember that time we all thought the squats were coming back in full force?" Or some other incident that ended up being misinterpreted tidbits. In the end, it's that tension between eager optimism and grounded realism that keeps the wheels spinning. What's undeniable is that these conspiracy theories reveal how passionately players connect with the Warhammer 40K universe. The setting's grand scale and cryptic nature practically invite this kind of speculation, and the fact that so much official lore remains fragmentary means fans can read between the lines to their heart's content. Some folks will chase every rumor, believing the Imperium is on the verge of unveiling its ultimate warriors. Others are content to watch from the sidelines, entertained by the show but unconvinced. Either way, the conversation is half the fun, dissecting theories, debating new evidence, and weaving our own narratives in a universe that thrives on secrets. So for now, the conspiracies spin on, fueled by half-leaked data, vague codex references, and the imaginations of thousands of hobbyists worldwide. Whether these theories turn out to be more than idle chatter, only time will tell. Yet, in a setting where entire worlds can go missing, and even the most outlandish stories can hide a grain of truth, writing off every rumor as nonsense might just mean missing out on the next big revelation. And in Warhammer 40K, that prospect is tantalizing enough to keep conspiracies alive, no matter how many times the skeptics insist it's all smoke and mirrors. It feels like everything comes back to that one core question. Would the Imperium truly risk reinventing its military might on such a monumental scale? Or is this all just a mirage in an already mystifying galaxy? The whispers, the speculation, the fervent community debates, all of it speaks to our fascination with the extreme measures humanity might take when pushed beyond its limits. If even a fraction of these stories holds any truth, it could redefine conflict in ways we've never seen, for better or worse. Yet until we get hard confirmation, all we can do is wonder how far the Imperium will go for the sake of survival, and whether this rumored legion of super soldiers truly lurks in the shadows, poised to change everything. Thanks for hanging out with me on this deep dive into one of the most intriguing mysteries circling the grim darkness of Warhammer 40K. If you enjoyed the journey, be sure to subscribe or follow so we can keep exploring this incredible universe together. Until next time, stay vigilant and let your imagination roam the stars.